Hey, I'm Brian Singh, and I'm half of Cozy Game Pals.
Hi, I'm Krista Castro, and I'm the other half of Cozy Game Pals.
We have Fear the Spotlight, which is Blumhouse Games' debut title. It's going to be out later this year. You can wishlist now on Steam.
So what is this game all about? I'm getting a lot of PS1 Resident Evil vibes.
Oh, for sure. This is our love letter to horror, and it's also like our invitation to horror, like to our friends and family who don't quite play horror or don't quite play a lot of games, but it's everything we love and know about horror. Try to cram it into one game.
Where did you guys draw inspirations from when you were designing the game's visual look?
Yeah, I think we grew up playing the classic like Silent Hills, Resident Evils, Fatal Frame. Those were big. Yes, that's a very If you notice the little twinkle, that's very much Fatal Frame. So yeah, there's a lot of inspiration of those like retro titles. But even horror movies and horror media we grew up with. Are You Afraid of the Dark? Goosebumps, these things. Yeah, just things that we know growing up when we were also their age, like in high school and middle school, like the things we remember being scared of.
So how do you make a horror game accessible to people who may not be familiar with the genre or may not care for it?
A lot of people are just intimidated by horror. They think it's full of jump scares, full of gross stuff. So for us, we keep thinking about teenage Krista and what she would have loved, And so it's a game that sort of learns a lot from modern game design, like making it sort of easy to play on the controller, as well as having content that flow of the game and the scenario really just kind of pushes you along, almost like a roller coaster ride. Like you're just always moving forward, always seeing something new and exciting.
Nick, you talk about the gameplay in your game. Is it like an inventory puzzle game, adventure game? Like what kind of gameplay are we talking about?
Yeah, I feel like our game goes through different modes because we really think about the pacing. Like there is like piecing together the story with notes. You're like reading notes. You come across a monster that you cannot fight, so you're stealthing, you're solving puzzles and finding keys and figuring out what to do, and exploring new areas. So those are the main bits of gameplay that you'll kind of be going between when you're playing Fear the Spotlight.
So what kind of environments will we be exploring? I see a library that has no power, apparently.
Yeah, so it's going to be a school. It's like very familiar places. So whatever you can think of at a school, like gyms and courtyards and things like that. So
game technology has advanced so far over the last decade, graphically and visually, and you have such a unique art style that harkens back to that PS1 days. Is it difficult to achieve that look with modern hardware? Does it take work, or is it easier because the tools are more advanced?
A little bit of both. It is, it's possible for a two-person team to do something like this because of modern tools, but for us, it's not necessarily the goal to just replicate that look. It's to try to make that look work for us. So we think that the sort of like shimmery pixels, that kind of look works really well in horror because it adds to the ambiguity and it gives you more. It kind of puts more on the player to fill in the gaps and imagine worse versions of what they're seeing. And we also very intentionally made the look add to that ambiguity. Like for example, the way the pixels move on the PlayStation with like the dithering, is a little bit different than what you see in our game. Like our dithering has extra shimmering to it because sometimes you might see a silhouette in the corner and you're not quite sure if it's there or not. So we wanted to make sure we took what we remember from our nostalgia and apply it to the design of horror.
I just think it's interesting because there are other game developers that like Digital Eclipse where they actually program in slowdown because they can't replicate. They have to recreate it because it's just what the systems did, and you can't naturally do that. So it's a very similar process. It sounds like when you're trying to get that jagged aesthetic.
Yeah, for us the goal is a lot less about replicating the hardware exactly, but just evoking enough of our nostalgia. And if we're getting the nostalgia, we're happy with it. We're very happy to incorporate a lot of modern touches. So like the soundscape is very modern feeling. The gameplay and controls are very modern feeling. Like it's not fixed camera. You got to move very smoothly through it. So game design has advanced a lot in the last 25 years. So we wanted to make sure to incorporate all of the lessons learned from game design. And
Did you have that discussion internally if the game would be fixed camera angles at one point?
We talked about it a little bit, but I think again, I think this is a little bit part of our accessibility for players, where we think it plays a little bit easier when you can look around and control the player, instead of having like these fixed cameras that might be confusing of like which way do I go now. So I think that plays into it, but we did talk about it a little bit for sure.
No, it's interesting because that's one of those nostalgia things you remember fondly, but it hasn't. And people are going to get mad at me. It hasn't aged well. People say, "Oh, we want fixed camera angles," but you put that in a game, and it's like, no, it doesn't really work in 2024.
Yeah, it has its own feeling to it. And so this game really is just a game to our taste. It's a very selfish
Yeah.
selfish game. We really put as much of ourselves into this game as we could. So a lot of it's just like our guts and our intuition. And for us, we preferred the modern style of controls versus the classic style.
Now, is the game a period piece in the 90s? Because your UI also kind of reflects like kind of like a VHS type of like menu system.
Yeah, it's a bit of both. It's like a little bit timeless, but a little bit, dated. It's mostly just what we remember from this age. Like the game features teenage girls going through a haunted high school, and so what do we remember from high school? We try to incorporate that because that's also the era when we were playing PlayStation games and things.
Now, sound is so important in a horror game. You can talk about how it plays a role in your game.
Yeah, I think we try to make sure that the soundscape scares us, and like we're mostly an artist and a coder, so we kind of do our best with sound. But I think we've tried to tune it into a way that we feel like is very scary. Like when you hear like a creak in the distance, it all just adds up to like the horror atmosphere. Especially because our game is such a slow burn. Like I feel like the sounds really add to like what people are visually seeing and experiencing.
Yeah, I'll add that sound is one of those things that can help your brain imagine more things. So if visually you're still not seeing quite a lot, you still hear like the fabric of your pants moving, or like, slight noises of things in your bag or in your pockets. Even though you're not seeing those things, the sound helps you really fill in the gaps and make the world feel more rich than what you're actually seeing.
How did you two meet and start collaborating on the project?
Oh, I guess we didn't mention we're married. So we're a married couple, and yeah, we've been, this is our first game. We like quit our jobs and with our own money started this project 2 years ago. Yeah.
2 years development cycle. That's pretty short for two people.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like we did make this game on our own time for about 2 years, and this was before Blumhouse. We actually released a version of this game last year, and we don't know what we're doing. We put it out there and started attracting people. Started building it started becoming like a bit of a hidden gem, and that's when Blumhouse found us. And so Blumhouse saw our game and thought, wow, this is really cool. They reached out to us and asked how they can help us. They said that they're fans, they just want to do anything they can do to help, and gave us a very open offer. And that's when we decided to partner with them, and we actually took the game down so that we can add more to it with Blumhouse's support. So this year, it's going to be re-released on all consoles and a lot of different languages with a ton of additional content. So before it was like a 2 to 3 hour game, and now it's going to be like a 3 to 5 hour game. And like the content that we've added since working with Blumhouse is like some of our favorite content in the whole game.
What does having a publisher like Blumhouse open up for you guys creatively? Because having more resources has got to be nice. Does it put any more pressure on you now that you have more time, more money, more funding to put into the game?
Yeah, it's like we have more funding, but it really is still just the two of us. We still kept what we liked working on with the original release. Like they really let us decide what we wanted to do. They didn't say like, oh, we think you should do this or whatever. They really said, this is your project, this is your baby, like go do what you want with it. And so what we decided on was like, yeah, we'll just the two of us again, we'll just add a new 1.5 to 2 hours of story because we thought that was the most exciting version of what we could add.
What's the biggest misconception you think about indie gaming? Because you're technically indie, you have a publisher, but you're technically indie gaming space from an outsider looking in about game development.
Oh, I don't know. I'm such a fan of indie. I love that's where the creativity is. I think that's where, it gives a small team the opportunity to get more personal. Like this is, a sample into our taste in horror. I think if we're talking about misconceptions, I think that maybe there's a misconception about horror that it is not for them, or if you're outside of horror, you might be afraid to give it a chance. But it's super exciting that Blumhouse is hopefully showing people that there really is horror for everybody. There's so much different kinds of horror, and them selecting our game as their debut, I think is very indicative of that philosophy. Like our game, a huge part of our motivating philosophy is to try to make horror that can be played by people who don't think they are into horror.
Yeah. No, I think that was great. I think I also just love games, and I think indie games in particular are the things that I really like. And I feel like a lot of my friends who play games are also very into indie games. I think it is like the horror thing again. Like, we made this game for the people who aren't necessarily into horror, but we want to convert them into horror fans, and we want to make a game for them that they can actually get through and finish. But also for people who might like horror movies and not necessarily play games, we think this would be a really welcoming experience. So I think as far as indie misconceptions, just that maybe it's just harder for people to find this stuff if you're not already in the know of games. So I'm hoping that with Blumhouse, because this is a studio that just casual people know that
you have a marketing budget.
Yeah, exactly. Those people will have a chance to find us. So.
Now, what was the game in your childhood that set you on the path into game development?
Game development in general. I've been making games since I was 13 years old, making Flash games on the internet. And so I'm Mario on the NES, that's my intro to games, and I've just loved everything about games since then, yeah.
I'm just a creative. This is actually my first game job. Before this, I was working in TV animation. I made cartoons. I just like making stuff. I think games that were inspiring to me that I was oh, I think I really want to start making games. Was Inside. That was a big inspiration for me to I want to try making something like that. Yeah.
The last question is, when does your game come out, and what platforms are you aiming for at launch, and where can they go to find more information about it?
Cool. Fear the Spotlight is going to be out this year on all platforms: Xbox, PlayStation, Switch, even previous generation Xbox and PlayStation, as well as PC. You can wishlist it now on Steam.